already telling, maybe we'll hear now something about the evolution of the concept of beauty.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for inviting me here, Maya. First of all, it's nice to be here. And it was really interesting to listen to the previous presentation because I really feel now I'm talking about a very different topic. Even though I think the subject is the same, but the perspective is now really different. I don't know, I think they are compatible to some extent, but I hope that I can bring something new here. First of all, I also want to say that I really love Icelandic landscape. It's really beautiful. I've been once in Iceland and wow, I have to go again. A few words about myself. I don't know what you have been told, but I have a PhD in comparative religion. I have written my PhD thesis about the cognitive and evolutionary foundations of paradise representations and continue this study extending it to health, which are not beautiful. I have done this work maybe for 10 years and extended my perspectives, and now I'm going to summarize many of my findings here, but I also try to bring some new ideas regarding beauty, because I haven't concentrated on beauty that much, but rather than the evolutionary functioning behind our experiences and the paradise concept. So I have divided this presentation for 3 parts, and I'm mostly not going to talk about paradises, but I'm going to start with emotional responses to landscapes. And as I said, my perspective is a bit different. Even though we discussed that it cannot be kind of divided into categories, but we have to treat the beautiful landscape as a whole. It's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to slice it in pieces. Then we're going to discuss these pieces. Then I'm going to go to the role of evolution. Maybe not as much as the title of my talk suggests, but I'm going to discuss why the emotional responses are what they are and what kind of evolutionary role they have. And finally, I'm going to apply these findings to paradises and ask the question whether paradise is about the extended aesthetics. I'm not saying that I'm going to provide a definite answer. You may decide whether there is one. But this kind of structure is what I'm going to follow now. Let's talk about environmental preferences, which is a term defined in environmental psychology. It became to wider use in 1970s when psychologists began to study which elements of environments are those we like and why. And there is a lot of experimental studies made, mostly in 70s and 80s, but also later. In Finland, there have been very recent studies regarding the stress-relieving effects of forests, for example. So the work is going on and probably the knowledge is improving all the time. But the basic findings we have here is that environmental preferences are something we all have. And actually, if we want to extend this, basically every living creature has some sort of environmental preferences. And plants, they cannot decide where they go because they can move. But any animal which have a mobility, they have preferences, starting from bacteria. Even bacteria try to find the most suitable habitat for themselves where they can survive and reproduce. And today, of course, we are going to talk about human environmental preferences. It's a little bit too wide topic if we go to bacteria and all the animals. So, important factors in these preferences are that they're really automatic. So, when we see a landscape, no matter what kind of it is, we immediately have emotional response. We judge it, whether we like it or not. But at this point, we are not talking about any kind of rational judgment, which we can consciously analyze or discuss. It's a kind of first moment. It's very, very intuitive. It's very, very rapid. And we do it all the time. We continuously, when we go outside, walk in woods, for example, continuously evaluate the landscape in front of you. And you don't even realize that you do it. You can also try doing it consciously, but I can tell you that you are not going anywhere because there are so many elements you have to take into account. So our mind does this kind of processing all the time, and it doesn't depend on one's cultural background. Certain types of landscapes and certain elements are generally preferred more than others cross-culturally. So it's not a cultural thing that I like lakes, everybody likes lakes, intuitively, for example, or rivers, because it's water element. So it's important, first step in my talk, that we kind of accept this. There's very solid experimental background that people actually process and evaluate environments this way. So now I'm going to slice this thing. There is a list of general properties which people prefer, irrespective of where they come from, how old they are, irrespective of gender, so on. First of all, we tend to like green environments, more than deserts. Sahara desert might be a beautiful one. So, but in general, if we have to choose between a nice forest view and similar desert view, people tend to choose the green view. And it's also very important that there is water. It doesn't have to dominate the landscape. In fact, it might not be that good if there is only water, because it makes being green quite impossible and so on. But some elements of water, rivers, streams, lakes, even sea. And we also don't like too complex landscapes. If a landscape is full of elements, it becomes difficult to evaluate. It's actually quite stressful. And people generally don't prefer when the complexity is too high. But the same applies to this desert example. If it's too low, people usually don't like it as much as they could if it was a bit more complex. And people also like that there are some signs of human presence. And this is interesting because even though we like human presence, if there is too much, people start to dislike it. For example, people who live in cities, even though they have lived in cities for their whole life, they still prefer natural environment as long as there is at least some human presence and signs of human presence present. If you, on the other hand, if you take a city person to a forest in the middle of wilderness and there is nothing that resembles a human presence, then they usually begin to dislike it because there is no familiarity. And also shelters, places people can hide, either from water or weather, of course, either from weather or hostile agents such as other humans or predators or such. It's important that you see that you have a place to hide if you need to. And then becomes an element which I cannot explain fully, I'm not going to do that, but in experiments, researchers have found that people like curved horizon. So horizon, if it's flat, it's not as appealing than if you have some little hills, for example. And then comes very important, it's only one bullet here, but it's really important, that familiarity. And familiarity is really closely linked to our ability to use that environment and use the landscape. If we know what we have in front of us and how we can best use it for our purposes and how we can work in it, it's really important. And familiarity actually explains most of the variance between the preferences, as we will see later in case of paratiisi. We are animals that learn, and we really heavily depend on our information we have learned throughout our life. So when we start, when we are born, we have this kind of boundaries for the preferences. But when we grow up and learn things, it becomes more and more cultural thing to have preferences. And also, maybe animals is a bit narrow here, you can also eat berries and plants and so on, but this refers to resources. It has also been found, the evidence is not that strong, but there is quite a little study, that the presence of animals that you can use actually make the landscape better. which is interesting because it's not dependent necessarily on the other aspects, but it's one thing. And of course, there are things that make the landscape worse in this sense. And these are if you have signs of danger, especially if you have some sort of animals that can pose you a threat, or there are maybe steep cliffs or things that make your use of the landscape difficult. Then you usually dislike the landscape as a whole a little bit less. And of course it depends on how many of these elements, if they are dominating the landscape, you to avoid it and so on. And of course if it's really boring place, if it's something like salt desert or something, it's very natural. Usually people don't prefer it very much. So this is a list I'm going to return, so you don't have to remember all these. I'm going to now provide an example. There are these nice stripes, they should not be there. But this is a landscape. I was thinking that maybe I could pose you a question that where would you like to put up a camp? And I have 3 examples here. We start from this. This is a typical Lappish landscape, maybe could be from Iceland as well. It has many properties we just discussed, which could make it good. Curved horizon, moderate complexity. But also it's not very green. There are some green elements behind on the background hills and so on. But generally, if one could choose, this would not be the place where one could put a camp. I can tell you that because I just came back from a hike, I would never have chosen this kind of place if I could choose. But if we modify this a little bit, we add those elements we like. And I don't know, I can make a ballot. If you would prefer this over the previous one, I don't know if you want to raise up their hand. This is better on the previous one. Okay, one vote. Okay, mostly. Okay, this is Lake Saarajärvi in northern Finland. And there we already have shelter and toilet, it's good. We have lake, so we can get water. There might be even fish, we don't know. The shape of the horizon is even a bit more curved. So there are many elements which make this already better. But in this case, this is not all, because this is not a real landscape you see if you go there. Nor is the next picture, I added one element there, but if we add a few more things, would you think this is even better than the previous one? I would say so. There are grow no pines in Saarajärvi, it's to the north. But that is a Saarnafell on the right side. It's very majestic, it makes the landscape really spectacular. And there are many, many positive elements now present. So this is just a demonstration of what it can be and how people very rapidly create the picture in the mind, whether they like this or not. So, if we see what is going on, is that our aesthetical experience, it actually depends on our intuition, and it's very rapid, and we cannot consciously control it. We can make further analysis, of course. It doesn't make any sense to say that this is where it stops. No, it's not that way. But the first impression of the landscape is very quick and it's very unconscious. And it's very typical of all humans to process information the same way. So the general properties of landscape we prefer, they are cultural and universal. When we go to details, we are getting to see some variance, whether people like it or not, and how much they like it. I had actually some interesting notion in my PhD thesis. I made a little survey, and there was a set of pictures. And of course, Finns are known to be really cautious and so on. So I asked them to rate the pictures from 1 to 7, and 7 was the highest score. And every time, the trends between foreign people who responded and the Finns were really similar. They were identical, except in one single case. But usually Finns gave a little bit lower scores, even though the trend was same. But when I showed them one picture from the Pallas Yllästunturi National Park, which is in Finnish Lapland, in that single case, Finns gave almost 7 points and foreigners gave something like 5. It was supposed to be a preferable landscape. Most of the elements I had built in that picture were designed the way that people should like it. and yes they did, but this was the only case where Finns actually liked it more than the rest of the respondents. It was really interesting to see that. When the familiarity comes to the picture, then actually the preference also arises. Okay, so this was the first part. I promised that I'm going to talk about evolution, and I promised it. Actually, so now I think that maybe I should tell you something about the role of evolution, because it's not straightforward, and I don't know if we can define first how much our evolutionary history actually affects our preferences. But considering that it's really culturally universal, this general set of preferences, it's very, very justified argument to say there is an evolutionary background. And we can go further back in our evolutionary history, but it of course it becomes more and more difficult because there is less and less remains and less evidence we can rely on. So let's say again that we are only talking about Homo sapiens here, and go to the other aspect of these preferences. We can talk about feelings, how much we like it. But we can also, and we should, discuss about why we like it. What's the reason to have exactly this set of properties we prefer or not prefer? Other animals have very different kind of preferences. We can take some little bird which absolutely needs pine forests and lots of insects. And of course it's different. But also there is a reason why, because this little thing can survive in the environment better than others. And this is exactly why I want to discuss this evolutionary aspect here. There is also lots of functions behind these preferences. The elements we prefer are not random, but they actually support our survival. So, the general properties of evolutionary ideal landscapes are the ones which can make us first survive, so we can get resources and hide from predators, so they keep us alive. And also they create conditions in which we can reproduce our offspring, and then they can also survive. So there are actually only 4 main properties. Again, these are very, very general. Details may vary almost as much as they can. But we have to be able to be safe. It's the first condition the landscape must meet. So either we must be able to hide, or we must see so well that we can see all potential threats in time. And again, if we can play seek and hide with predators and win, it's very good. We also must have access to resources. And again, we hope that there are not much threats, because threats make it always more difficult to use that environment. And if you now see the list I showed you before, you can see it again. I have used green color for those elements of which we prefer, which are evolutionarily relevant and which are evolutionarily useful. And red color, you can guess, it's those negative aspects. And if we go to fertile environments, tend to be green. So if the soil is fertile, there are lots of plants, lots of resources which we can potentially have access and use. Of course, this is potentially. Some plants, for example, if you eat them, you die. They are so poisonous. So it's not always the case that the green is good. But generally, green it indicates that there is access to resources. And water, of course, it should be quite self-evident. We didn't survive many days without water. So one should think that if you have water, access to water, then it's a very, very positive aspect. I can tell you again from that hike, we took 8 days, we had no water with us, so we always were dependent on the next source of water. So we had to plan our routes that, okay, here's water, so we can refill our bottles and get some drinking water. So it's a very concrete way to study this evolution. And also shelters, whether natural or artificial. So if we build a house, it's as good shelter as a cave, for example. A familiarity here, it's very important. I maybe should have it on bold, because how to use the environment is it's crucial in evolutionary context. If you want to survive, you have to be able to optimize your behavior to make sure that you survive. So using the shortest route to the source of water, for example, is a good idea, or knowing where the predators tend to come from. So using the environment in evolutionary context, it's extremely crucial. And we're going to that next, because it's one thing that determines why there is so much variance between the exact preferences. And of course, if we have some nice rabbits or moose or whatever we can eat and make us feel better, it's also a good sign. So if you have game which is easily hunted, for example, then you are in a good place. So the variance thing, before we go to this nature-nurture discussion, which is really interesting, and also I think the cultural role is that preferences adapt to local circumstances. It's a role of learning here, which is really important. We cannot leave it out if we want to discuss why some group of people have chosen this particular landscape in any part of the world. Because the resources provided are different, threats are different. So people have to cope with different kinds of challenges and develop different kinds of strategies to make the survival possible. So I would say that evolved preferences only create boundaries, that kind of cognitive boundaries within which preferences actually take different shapes. And we can see this if you go to different parts of the world where people have adapted to different kind of food, for example, because it's something that is available in this part of the world. These are good examples. And there is one classical study which I'm not sure how representative it is, but it was made in 1982, if I remember correctly. John Bally and John Falk, this very famous theory, savanna theory, that people tend to favor savanna-like landscapes because this is where our species is born. And it's a bit controversial in some aspects. As there is one very interesting point I would like to now emphasize that the younger the children were in that study, the more they preferred the savanna landscape. And already teenagers had much more preference towards their familiar landscapes and environments, which they were learned to live and cope with. So it seems that we are born with a certain kind of set of expectations, but our experience modifies it and explains the differences then. It was really interesting. I don't know actually if it has been ever been repeated, but it's very interesting to see that even the preferences evolve in one's life when he or she grows up. Okay, this was the second part. Now we go to paratiises. Finally, this is all very important background information when I'm going to ask whether paratiises are extended aesthetics and what kind of role the evolution and environmental preferences play in this process. First of all, there are some general properties of paratiises across the world. In my PhD thesis and in one book I wrote after it, I collected about 20-25 different descriptions of paratiises across the world from different eras, ranging from 4,000 old to only 20 years old. They are all the same. And that's why I wrote this list, because these are the elements you meet every time you come across different descriptions. These almost every time, these are the ones that you will meet. Of course, there are differences, I can do that a bit later. But still, they are usually all this thing. They provide you everything you ever need, and a little bit more then. So, interesting is also that they are very much like our world here. One should think that you are imagining an afterlife world, which is a heavenly place, which God has created. There should be no limits. It should be, basically, you should have anything you can ever imagine and beyond. But it doesn't seem to be the case. People use really real world terms. They take the terms, they think that, okay, this will be the perfect world, and they actually create perfect landscapes. I have a few examples here for you to show what I actually mean. I'm not going to read them through, I trust that you can read them yourself. The first one is from the Aztecs, from the Mesoamerican culture. This was actually a paradise reserved for those who were drowned in storm or killed by lightning struck. Interesting. Because it has nothing to do with morality, as usually is the case. But if we see the description, we see that they list a list of plants and fruits they can eat. They have lots of water there. It's very happy place. Nobody gets sick or even feels no shore. Even if it's husband can set it a butterfly and fly back to the world. So, if you think of this landscape, there's very little in supernatural elements which we cannot access in this world. And if we proceed to a little bit another place, we go to Australia. Australia was a bit difficult place to get any information because it was basically oral cultures of hunter-gatherers. So there was very little of written sources, and they are usually written by anthropologists. So it's a bit of indirect information. But basically, different tribes in Australia have this kind of concept for paradise. And again, it depends a little bit what I tell you. People who have lived on the coast usually use this island concept. People who have been deeper inland use this as sky concept. But again, if we think this landscape tastes right, extreme lots of water, extreme lots of resources, everything is very easy. If we went to Africa, there is even game that will come to you, so you can kill it and eat it. So, but again, access to resources. Yeah, it's really easy. It really wants myself. And finally, third example, actually two examples of Taoist paradises. These are a bit different because they're much more reference to cultures. But again, we have lakes, and these are located in the middle of mountains, in valleys, behind the mountains, no one can actually access. And there we see cultural things, but also again, we have lots of references to such fruits. So what I'm saying with these examples is that paradises are closely linked to our landscape preferences, to the elements. We cannot say based on these texts whether the landscape people imagine is exactly the same preferences would indicate. But at least when literal sources are used, they list the same elements we would prefer intuitively. And now the final time I show you this list, I have again used the green color and red color similarly as in the previous example. We are already having quite good correlation here. We prefer things that are evolutionarily relevant and which we prefer intuitively. And again, things we don't want to see in our paradise are usually those that we would like to see in the real world either. So, now comes the problem of aesthetics. It's a difficult concept. Anyway, I think we could argue about it for decades and never come to a definite answer. It's a little bit case with religion also. But why I'm suggesting that this would be extended instead of just aesthetics is that paradises are places, well, whether you believe it or not, but if you go there, you're never going to come back to tell us. So, we don't have direct information how it would look. It's our mental representation. We can form this picture in our minds, but it can be a little bit different, and explicitly telling to other people what the landscape looks like. It is a bit difficult. So, these are kind of mental landscapes, I put it in a call this because it's a term I just invented. There are mental ideal landscapes. We all have our little bit different conception, an idea of how it should look like. So there is individual differences, individual variances, just like in environmental preferences. But what do they exactly look like? And I must say, at this point I'm saying that I don't know. If I would make this kind of experiment, in principle it can be made, but there is a problem that the image is in the individual's mind, and if this person doesn't have the skill to express it properly, then it's very difficult to tell what this picture exactly is looking like. So this is very interesting experiment. I urge anyone interested to do it if they like, because, for example, a group of artists could provide so detailed information that scientific conclusions could be made. I don't know. This is just an idea I wanted to bring up here. But I would like to finally show you one picture which very well illustrates the idea that we are looking for. It's actually that little picture over there, and this is how it looks like when it's a little bigger. This is Wetzel Peters' Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden from the 19th century. And I would say that this is a very good representation of this, what I have just told. First of all, we know that artists' aim has been to create a landscape of paradise, in this case. And secondly, he has used a very realistic way of painting, so we don't have to guess at whether abstractions are, which they symbolize or so on. And if we check this landscape, we see curved horizon here, curved horizon here, nice waterfalls, plenty of water, lots of green environment, shelter, very nice view, and lots of colors. And also, this one has lots of animals which do not live in the same continent. So we have turkeys and lions and parrots, for example. Okay, one could now ask that there are some signs of danger. There are lions and tigers. But in this case, they seem really beautiful and peaceful animals. And actually, as the Genesis suggests, and the book of Isaiah later in the Bible collection, even lions eat grass in paradise, so there is no worry. So they have been included here. But if you watch this picture, I think this is a really beautiful example. Not only is this very, very beautiful painting, but it beautifully kind of collects all of these aspects together in just one single work. And I really like it. And also this suggests that the climate is really good because they don't even have to wear any clothes, and it's really comfortable. So, if I put this all up, we need to understand the role of evolution here and how our cognitive mechanisms are evolved to process information related to landscapes to better understand why we think something is beautiful or something is not. The concept of beauty is really difficult, as we discussed before, and I am saying that this is going to provide a definite answer how we should define it. But this is an aspect and perspective we should take into account. We are not formed these beauty conceptions or aesthetic freely, but there are cognitive boundaries that kind of set the limits what we think is beautiful when it comes to landscapes. Of course, there are different things which can be beautiful or not. And paradises are kind of ultimate representations of evolutionary ideal circumstances. And as landscapes, they provide us everything we need and take everything off we don't want or need. And they even provide all these resources indefinitely, so it's an eternally ideal landscape. So the aesthetical experience, while there is variance, these general elements, as I showed you, they are invented all over again, irrespective of cultural contexts all over the world. And why the paradises will change is that the world around us changes. But as long as we keep those boundaries, then we are having a very similar concept because of this cognitive and evolutionary aspects. I should have had one more example here. I found it. Very interesting UFO religion called Relianism. It's made by Ryle, who claims that he has actually visited paradise for several times, traveling with UFO. It's interesting because it was created in the 1970s, so it's really modern compared to these examples I showed here. But also, basically, the only difference is that Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, and Buddha lived there together peacefully. It's almost the only difference to these concepts. There are also waterfalls, beautiful flowers, green hills, and so on. So, even though we have had all the freedom and all this religious information we could have used in any way we would in this book, we chose to say same elements all over again. I have time for one little story. It's related to this Ryle's book. I use it, of course, as a reference because I analyzed the text. And then there is a Finnish newspaper, Uusi Suomi, which only is published in the net. And shortly after my PhD thesis was published, they published a news about this thesis. They had chosen the most tiniest detail in the whole thesis for their title. Because in Riley and Paradise there are also robots who are sexually willing and do whatever we wish them to do. Okay? So this was what they chose. All the details, different Paradise Dream sexual robots. So I was this close to write the feedback and then I thought, okay, let it go. And actually, it was in the top 10. It was actually the most read news in that day was published. So they knew how to create titles, but I wasn't very happy about it. Because there were so many other things. And of course in the comments there was, okay, now a researcher has done, is this really worthwhile? Okay. But okay, with this little story I would like to thank you and show you a little picture of a really, really spectacular landscape. This is me in Sarek National Park in northern Sweden. Actually exactly 1 month ago. It took 4 days to get to this, near the top of this fell. It's Närhi. And it took 4 days to get up from there, and it was much more difficult because it started to rain and everything was horrible. But the landscape is really beautiful. These kind of landscapes are really unique in Scandinavian context. A really great place if you have the skill and endurance.